everyone. Happy Thursday. As y'all enter the webinar today, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, input your name, your role, what institution you're coming from, and just one adjective to describe how you feel about AI and education. And if it's your first week back in class this week, happy first week of class. So feel free to introduce yourselves. As we get started, I am going to go over some housekeeping rules. So first and foremost, the recording to this webinar and attendance certificate will be shared with all attendees within the next 2 days. So you'll get an email, it'll have a link to this deck, it'll have a link to the recording, and it'll have a attendee certificate. All questions that you have for today, please put them in the Q&A feature. And then any other sort of comment or engagement, feel free to use the chat. We don't limit the chat by any means. We encourage everybody to share their thoughts, engage with other attendees here, maybe even do some networking, say hi to a friend. So questions in the Q&A chat, put in all of your thoughts, shares, opinions, reflections. And then panelists, myself, and then also a couple of colleagues from PackBack will be monitoring the Q&A function. They'll be answering questions live. They'll be passing questions to me and the panelists, etc. So that's some housekeeping. If you're just funneling in now, as a reminder, there we go. Introduce yourself in the chat, name, role, institution, and one adjective to describe how you feel about AI and education. Good to see some familiar names in the chat. So to get started, let's do some introductions. My name is Kelsey Beringer. I'm the CEO over at PackBack. We are an AI-enabled writing and discussion platform used in higher education and K-12. So if it's not obvious, I am very pro use of thoughtful technology in the classroom. And I want to be honest with that, that I am pro technology. I was when I was a classroom teacher. I am especially now as a education technology CEO. And I have today Jadrian Wooten, if you want to introduce yourself quickly.
Sure. So my name is Jadrian, and I'm an economics professor at Virginia Tech, and I serve as the director of our undergraduate program at Virginia Tech as well.
Happy to have you today. Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Create. I am a lecturer at San Jose State. I am one of the first-year writing instructors.
And lastly, today we are joined by Dr. Rufus Glasper. So Rufus, introduce yourself.
Good morning and afternoon, wherever you might be. Rufus Glasper, President and CEO, the League for Innovation in the Community College and Chancellor Emeritus of the Maricopa Community Colleges.
Wonderful. And today we have a wonderful agenda. We're going to hear from Rufus to kind of set the tone for the intention of today's session. We'll talk about what's in the news as it relates to AI and education and hear from our panelists. We'll have a discussion with them. We'll do a Q&A. So if you do have questions, please throw them in the Q&A function. We'll get to answering them. We'll share some of our favorite resources as it relates to the intersection of education and AI, and then we'll have some closing remarks. And I mentioned this earlier, but the recording to this session and the deck itself will be shared within 2 days afterwards. So you will get all of this material, and please feel free to share it. I have a quote. It's a model I used to live by when I was teaching. It's good teachers borrow, great teachers steal. So steal this content away and share it with your friends. So let's go ahead and shoot it over to Dr. Rufus Glasper to set the tone for today.
Kelsey, I'm still laughing about your quote, but thank you very much for allowing me to make some comments from the League for Innovation. We're very excited to continue this conversation and the partnership with PackBack around AI. And welcome back to the new semester. Everything is changing every day, very rapidly. And from today, from the perspective where I sit in community colleges across the country, and every educational institution, and quite frankly, every business, every nonprofit is looking at what is happening with this notion of generative AI, chat GPT, and its impact on us daily. And this is just an opportunity for us to update you on these changes. Quite frankly, many of us are going to be taking cues from what happens in our educational institutions in terms of how we use our daily lives. How does my nonprofit begin to look at this particular dialogue that we're involved in, this particular piece of technology that allows us to think about how do we make our own leadership functions run better, faster, quicker, and more inclusive? And how do we do that without the fear of technology taking away what we believe are daily tasks that require us to actually have knowledge about a particular topic and how its application is made. The stories that you will hear today will allow you to personalize some of the ways that these two individuals, these two faculty are using it within their classroom and how they may use it personally. But we want you to walk away and think about what is your next step. How do you engage your institution? What policy, practices, and institutional levels of engagement will occur based upon this conversation or ones that you think might include your institutions? This is all about not feeling that you're inadequate in any way because you aren't keeping up with it as fast as you can, because I don't believe anyone can. But think about in using generative AI in your daily applications, just so you are aware of some of the changes and you can move faster, quicker, and more innovatively. And with that, I ask that you sit back, engage in the chat, think about what does this mean to you and the questions that you ponder about, and see if we can't have some dialogue together. So Kelsey, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Rufus. And also, I love that Jadrian just got a shout out in the chat for his Monday Morning Economist newsletter, it sounds like. So we'll have to talk about pumpkin spice lattes later. So just a reminder, if you're new here, if you've been to these sessions before, we run them often in collaboration between PACBAC and the League for Innovation. So we've done 2 workshops now. They're active working sessions on creating ChatGPT-proof assignments, creating a policy in your course. And next week, we'll do a workshop on creating actual lessons you can implement in your curriculum about teaching your students about generative AI, maybe just what it means for them in their careers, maybe actually getting on a generative AI platform and using it, kind of that full spectrum. We also do these roundups, which is just kind of this podcast style. Let's talk about news with people who are in it, using the technology, affected by the technology. We have one from July 20th recorded, and you can access all of these recordings and upcoming sessions at pacbac.co/webinars. So use that as a great place to go for resources. And if you're a repeat returner from these webinar series, it's good to see you again. And thank you. So we're going to launch with just a brief introductory poll to get a baseline of the audience. Where are we in our AI journeys? How are we feeling about AI? Is it something that horrifies us or excites us? Maybe a little bit of both. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that introductory poll, and I'll give everybody about 90-ish seconds to complete that. And I'll just ask the panelists here too for their quick answer, which is, how often do you use generative AI? So Jadrian, you first. How often are you using it?
Sure. Mine is daily. Definitely daily.
Hourly?
It could between 8 and 5. Yeah, it might be hourly. It's definitely daily.
And then Chelsea, how about you?
Mine is also daily. I do use it quite often.
All right, so I'll definitely acknowledge if you're new to this space or you're joining, you're surrounded by a team of tech enthusiasts. So we will maybe be a little bit biased towards embracing technology, and we're going to acknowledge our love of technology before we dive into our sessions here. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll in just one moment. Let's get a few more answers. There's a very even distribution. I'm happy that hating generative AI has no responses. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share the results here. How often do we use generative AI? It seems like it's a widespread. So of the folks who answered never, maybe today you'll hear of a really good application and a way you can use generative AI. Would you ever use generative AI in a writing assignment as an entry point to students? 87 said yes, 73%, a few undecided and a few no. And we'll kind of dig into that today, what it can actually look like. Sentiment towards AI, pretty much across the board, somewhere in the middle. I'd say I love it, but I'm also like very much mindful of the long-term implications on career automation, new job creation from it. And just kind of, I think there's a little bit of anxiety about what the future is going to look like, not in a year, but 10 years, I'd say. Has the advent of LLMs changed the way you assign writing? 37% said, no, not really. Handwritten assignments, multimodal assignments, other, and if you chose other, please elaborate in the chat. So now that we have our little baseline, we're going to dive into a couple of different news stories. I'll present it, and then I'll ask Jadri and Chelsea kind of their opinions on these. And I have my notes up on my phone, so if I look away, that's what I'm doing here. I would love to have memorized these stories, but I just am not quite there yet. So first and foremost, if you haven't read this yet, Amazon added AI-generated review summaries to the review section, so you don't have to read individual reviews. Now, you're probably saying this has nothing to do with education. Why are we talking about this? The reason I wanted to show this story is because I think it does a great job showing the application of generative AI to make our workflows and user experiences more seamless and easier, right? And I think we could start using this story as a baseline for understanding how can we leverage generative AI, not to just write content for us that we have to write, but actually make our user workflows a little bit easier. So Jadrian, you had talked about kind of what this story meant to you. So if you want to share your perspective on kind of this application of generative AI as a summary perspective.
Yeah, so I teach very large sections of principles of economics, and I have for multiple years. So like for me, it's like my big section is 600 students. So at the end of the year, I get 200 written comments about what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, what they would like to see and not see. And when I first started teaching, it was very meticulous. Like I would go through each comment and try to keep track of, what are people saying, try to mapping it out. And then really, I don't know why it took, I'll say it took me so long because it happened in May and I probably should have done it in December. But then realizing that I can actually just use ChatGPT to say, here are all the comments, and I just copy and paste them. Please give me the 5 key takeaways of what I'm doing well, what I'm not doing well, things like that. And it has basically cut out a huge chunk of time in terms of actually reading it and reading each entry. And then I can actually kind of look at them as summaries and say, okay, what do I need to change? What do I need to keep? What is actually working? It also helps me tremendously in the sense of like, it can filter out the parts of evaluations we don't love. His voice is super annoying. I don't have to read that anymore, which has also helped with my mental health in terms of really actually focusing on how I can teach better. So I've really appreciated it. And so that's what this reminded me of, is this idea of how do we take 100, right? One of these products has 1,000 global ratings. How do we take 1,000 reviews and sort of narrow it down to kind of key points? And I really like that.
I have probably not a hot take, which I think like somebody with an undeveloped frontal lobe, like getting to anonymously review you as a professional is a little bit wild as a concept, if I'm being honest. I think when I would read my own reviews, it's really hard not to take it personally. And if you can have a summary of your evaluations and like you're saying, kind of blur out some of these one-offs, kind of hurtful evaluations, that sounds like a great application of this tool. Shield yourself for your own mental health. I love that. And then Chelsea, you actually pointed out something from this review itself. And so I want you to highlight that, what you saw that I didn't see. And then just share your overall perspective too on like how else we could be thinking of generative AI to support our workflows.
Yeah, so in the headphones one, it says that some customers said that it was good quality. Some customer says that it was bad quality. And so it's contradicting itself. And we talked a little bit before on how AI could potentially give more weight to some reviews than others, or there's a potential for Amazon to sneak in their bias. And so it's important to teach students the applications, but also to be wary of how they're being applied.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely, again, I was saying I have like a conspiracy theorist tendency with things like reviews and applications, but there is the question of generative AI, especially in this sort of application, might make things a little bit easier in user workflows, but does it still negate our responsibility to go in and maybe do a more thorough review? Like maybe this just will help us really quickly take our list from 10 options to 5 options or 2 options, and we still want to dig into those 2 options. That's kind of the way I think about it. So perhaps it's cutting down our, I'm going to re-review time by 50%, but not 90%, which raise your hand if you just read reviews endlessly until you're stuck in a spiral of indecisiveness. Yeah. I forgot you can raise your hand on Zoom. I love that. I'm glad I have community here. Well, transitioning to something that maybe is a little bit more directly related to applications in education. This article came out about deepfake speech technology. And if you don't know what a deepfake is, it's essentially just fake AI generated images, videos, noise, etc. Recently, I was shown, it was like, you can use AI to have a popular celebrity sing another popular celebrity song, like that sort of silly application. But I'll just read what it says here. Researchers generated 50 deepfake speech samples in each language and played them to 529 participants. 27% of the time listeners thought the deepfake speech was real. So our detection technology isn't necessarily super reliable. And we're also going to start losing the ability to actually differentiating between real and AI generated as critical thinking human beings. And the implications here are, number one, in education, we do rely on detection in many different forms, but also let's think about it this way. If you're getting a robocall that doesn't sound like a robot anymore, it sounds like a real person. What are the implications on things like how we protect ourselves from scams, et cetera? So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to just ask each panelist kind of their philosophy and approach to AI detection in their courses. So Chelsea, I'll start with you. You're a writing instructor. How have you been navigating AI detection and students using AI text generation?
Yeah, so it has happened a few times. After you read enough ChatGPT essays, you start to know what they all look like. And because it is a pattern recognition software, it spits out that pattern. It's extremely formulaic, and you see the same sentences in the introduction, the same sentences in the conclusion. So it's easy to spot AI in student writing. And for my approach, I can't rely on the detectors because they're not 100% accurate and they have some biases. So I don't ever want to accuse a student of using AI, especially if they haven't. So instead, I will approach it from a writing quality standpoint, and I'll come to them and say, this writing is really formulaic. Would you like additional help on how to add your own style and voice to it? And coming from a more sympathetic approach than an accusatory one, or looking to help rather than to punish.
Lost the mute button there. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think something that we forget as educators is setting kind of the intention, I think, with students when they approach their writing, that we want to hear their voice. The best writing is heavy in voice. And also acknowledging that some disciplines, voice actually doesn't belong there. I'm thinking about when I would do scientific writing in chemistry and physics, I wasn't putting in my voice, right? That's not the place for it. It's a place to be concise and direct and factual. But that's where, as an instructor, you can say, GPT, generative AI, isn't reliably factual. So you need to be doing your own writing for this reason or this reason. What is it? Is it factual inaccuracies, or is it because nobody wants to read a robot? Right? So set that intention with your students and set them up for success. And then if they're still not following guidelines, then you can say, I've done my due diligence here. Now it's time for me to intervene. Jadrian, how about you? How is your kind of relationship with AI detection right now?
So I have used it. I've used it multiple times, but I've only actually had to, I'll say, use it against a student once. And it was, I don't use them as sort of the first round of, everything goes through a detection system which I think is what is probably more common with something like Turnitin, where you dump every paper in there first. It was definitely something I used sort of on the back end, where I noticed a student was changed his writing style, and it didn't seem to fit with what we were asking them to do. The prompts, like as Chelsea mentioned, like you could tell as soon as I was reading through, I was like, this doesn't fit with everyone else, and oh yeah, it doesn't fit kind of backwards with their work as well. And so I used it kind of on the back end, and a lot of it was exactly what Chelsea said, is going back to them and just sort of reminding them why the assignment exists. I think, especially as educators, we tend to, especially when we teach the same course over and over and over again, I think when we first do it, we are very explicit about why we're doing each assignment, and then we sort of kind of forget to tell students that. And so it was a good chance to sort of remind them, like, we're doing this assignment for this reason. I want to hear your perspective, your experience, and that's what actually matters, not, writing quality or examples other places. And so it was a nice chance to remind myself too of kind of why I assigned the assignments I do.
I love that. And you had mentioned earlier, it was kind of like you noticed a student was previously talking in the first person in the first few weeks and then started talking in the third person. And it's like small things like that are really easy for us to detect if we have baselines and consistencies. And so something I've told a lot of instructors is it depends on the size of your course. Obviously, if you're teaching, Deidre, you've taught like 900 econ students at once before, you're probably not going to be able to get them to all do a written assignment the first day of class and like establish voice. But if you can get a baseline, what's your voice, what's your writing style, that's a great thing to come back to with your student. And it's not, when you do have those intervention conversations, it's not like, don't cheat. It's more like, I like this person, be this person. Any other thoughts on AI detection or kind of like running into AI generated work?
I can chime in. I would say quickly, I think you and I maybe have talked about this at a previous time. I think what scares me the most is not so much that those sites exist, but that there are faculty out there who assume that they are like 100% accurate. Like, I know that there are people out there who will just trust whatever, like Turnitin, for example, says like, oh, this was copied. I'm like, it might not be. And right, that idea of like, you should, as an instructor, you should still be checking what's going on. And so I worry most about people who are blind, I'll say faculty who are blindly using it to punish a student without really realizing what they're using. And then that sort of works its way back to me because I have a stressed out student who's not doing well because they've been accused of cheating and they really haven't been. So that's where, when it comes to AI detection stuff, like that's what actually freaks me out the most, is what my colleagues are doing, not necessarily like trying to punish students for using AI.
Yeah. And for English language learners, because they're still learning, they're writing in very simple formulaic sentences. So their writing is more likely to get flagged as AI rather than somebody who is able to take AI and adapt it to add more flowery language in it.
Absolutely. And I had just read this in a LinkedIn article that was shared, which Vanderbilt just announced, I think either yesterday or today, that they're going to be shutting down the AI text detection tool from Turnitin because of the mystery behind AI detection. The reality is plagiarism detection is much easier because there is a database of all of the text that's ever been written, right? Or most of it. We can fact check against it, and you could be presented, this is exactly where in student text we found matches. AI text detection is the statistical probability that this was written by AI. And the accuracy of AI detectors greatly varies based off of the length of text. So if you're putting in 50 words and you say, was this AI generated? The quality of that accuracy, low. Now, if it's an entire 7-page paper, high. Right? Much higher. So the more text it has, but also we're going to run into GPT, generative AI getting so good that detection might be a losing battle for all we know. So I might actually want to pause here and turn it back on the panelists. I've talked with educators who just aren't quite ready yet to fully trust their students to not use generative AI, or they're being directed to have some form of detection. And change is hard, especially if you've been teaching writing for decades, right? What advice would you give instructors who, let's say, are really, really wary about just not doing AI text detection at all?
I was gonna let Chelsea go first because I feel like this is not my lane to speak because I'm an economist who a lot of my work is graphs and math, and so I feel a little protected in the short term. So I feel like I'm gonna let Chelsea step in for this one.
Yeah. It's hard because it is still so very new. And I actually had a professional development the other day where we talked about ChatGPT, and I led a table discussion on how we can implement AI into assignments. And one of the questions was, well, how do we prevent students from just using AI for every step of the writing process? And I kind of shrugged my shoulders. And I think we have to do a lot of proactive work so that we don't have to be as reactive. If we are able to be open and honest with our students and show them how ChatGPT works and its great limitations, and that instead can be used as a tool, then they're more likely to use it as a tool rather than to get the product out of it. And just letting your students know that their voice is more important than what ChatGPT has to say. If we come at it from that approach, you may find that your students do want to learn how to write. They do want to be part of that process and to show what they can put forth. And if you go in from that, assuming the best intentions and the honor system, I think you'll find that your students are less likely to rely on ChatGPT. And I'm sure that there will always be some student that does that. And I think at that point, that's on the student. If they're, if they are relying too much on the AI software, then it's affecting their education. We can do as much as we can to support them. But at the end of the day, if they're not willing, then, I mean, it's just, I hate to say it, but, that's just something we might not be able to prevent.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll right now on generative AI detection, just to get a pulse check of those in the room. How are you using detection, if at all? But I'm going to use this as a quick plug for PackBack, not the tool, but one of the frameworks that we've built PackBack upon, and it's called the self-determination theory. And it says, and it's basically the conditions that must be met in order for somebody to feel intrinsically motivated. This applies to folks in their careers. This applies to students in the classroom. And I think we could all agree upon, if a student is intrinsically motivated, they do not cheat. They are motivated to achieve mastery. They are motivated to own their work. They're motivated to learn, not to just get an A, right? So really the question isn't how do we prevent plagiarism? It's how do we foster a sense of intrinsic motivation in every student? And just to provide some insight, that those 3 conditions that must be necessary: autonomy, so giving students choice. And when we talk about being open and transparent, it's maybe saying something like, hey, I'm not going to require nor ban the use of generative AI. I'll allow it if you really want to. This is just what I expect from you in return. Cite it. Don't use it to generate content directly, right? So maybe giving them that choice automatically is going to, let's say, decrease the odds by 10%. The second is going to be purpose. So again, if you're a teacher who wants to hear voice, help them understand the power of voice. If you're a teacher who needs them to write scientifically, teach them the power of accurate, concise writing. And then I hope I don't forget the last one. Yes, mastery. Yes, I almost forgot it. That would be criminal in my role. Mastery. So it's this concept of, in order to be intrinsically motivated, you have to be on the cusp of or have achieved mastery in something. Because think about it, if a student fails 100 times, they may give up. If they fail once or twice, but then are able to win that 3rd time, they're going to keep going. And when we think about why students might use GPT to cheat, it's probably because they're not confident in their own writing skills. So why don't we make sure that we are giving them the support they need to establish mastery and foundational writing skills? So that's my little spiel for self-determination theory. I definitely recommend everybody look into it and use it to inform how they, devise their curriculum this fall. So looking at the poll results, I'll share them right now. Assuming you're an instructor and work directly with students, have you come across an instance of blatant Gen AI abuse? 33% say yes, 50% say not yet, 17% don't work with students. Do we regularly use AI detection? 45% say no, and I don't plan on it. The other large majority says sometimes, but not often, which I think is kind of the trend we're running into now. And I think if Caitlin hasn't already, she'll share that article about Vanderbilt's decision to pull AI text detection. So in our next story, I'll transition to, this is news from Tampa Bay, from Florida. Some Tampa Bay high schools, I think it's 9 districts, will be receiving AI curriculum that was established and built in University of Florida, specifically from this instructor right here, Nancy. So I'll read from the article just so that I can save us some time here, but University of Florida has developed a program called AI Foundation, which aims to get students ready for an AI-powered workforce. It's a 4-course curriculum that will teach the students foundation of AI, data science, ethics, and societal impacts. The big news is that after a successful pilot last year in 3 counties, AI Foundations is now expanding to 9 more counties across Florida, including major population centers like Hillsborough, Pasco. Starting the school year, it will be offered through the state's career and technology education programs. So in reading this, it's clear that they're going to be teaching students not only how to identify AI in their everyday life and applications, but actually maybe start building AI. So I'll start with you, Chelsea. You know, you're a writing instructor, and I'm sure you don't want students just copying, pasting ChatGPT outputs. That'd be probably a very sad day for you. So at the same time, you were saying you actually plan on incorporating generative AI into your curriculum this fall. So would you tell us more about your plans to kind of prepare students for the workforce as it relates to your discipline?
Yeah, I am going to teach my students that AI can be used as an assistant. So from day 1, or I guess day 2, we'll be looking at how you can use AI to help you understand your assignments, come up with the schedule to complete the assignments, get feedback on those assignments, and use it as a tool to work with you rather than relying on the product. If you use it as a tool, it's much more beneficial. So you can see the process, and then you can practice being part of the process rather than just relying on whatever end result it comes up with. One of my colleagues had a great quote, and it said that AI is not coming for your job. Somebody who knows how to use AI is. That really hit me.
Yeah, and Jadrian, what are your thoughts on, I know this fall you have your large intro course, but just on thinking about how you can weave generative AI or applications of AI into your curriculum in the future?
Yeah, so it's definitely easier, I think, in the future. So I like I said earlier, I think I'm very fortunate that I have an easier teaching load for the spring compared to other ones. And so where I think actually where Chelsea ended off is exactly how I sort of think about, especially like even news articles like this, is that there are going to be people who are well trained in using it as an assistant to sort of level themselves up. And I start to, I guess where I get very, I will say uncomfortable, but uncomfortable in a sense that there are going to be these schools that are doing it and helping people move ahead. And I'm very worried about sort of the future inequality between students who are not getting that training and are doing things, I don't want to say by hand, but it's the idea of like, imagine like flashback 30 years and imagine, you know, one school is teaching students how to use computer programs and Word software, and another one is still doing typewriters because we don't want students to be manually saving and sharing files. That's where I get very nervous about my students coming in. Some of them are going to be really good at using them and some of them are not. And some of them are trying to learn on their own. And I am just at the very end of the spring started to deal with students who are realizing that things like ChatGPT are not always accurate, but this belief that it is. So there's this, they're not being taught. They're not being taught that sometimes it's real, sometimes it's not, sometimes it has errors. A lot of them are going in with the idea that it's just this perfect output and that's the right answer. And I noticed at the end is I was starting to explain to students that like, no, this isn't right, it's actually this. And I'm sort of like, it's like, I guess it's maybe almost like the Wikipedia thing, right? Like, is you now have to convince them that Wikipedia is wrong about something and that it's actually this other thing because somebody has changed it. That's where I'm thinking like going forward is I need to get better at doing that, of teaching students how to be able to read the output, fact check the output, use it as a tool, and not just this pure substitution. And I don't think that I'm fully ready for that conversation with students yet.
Yeah, one piece of advice I've thrown out a few times now is maybe you're not comfortable as an educator teaching your students directly how to use generative AI. Like, and also, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and argue that a lot of our students have probably figured out how to use Gen AI much better than we have too. So like, that's the thing. So it's like, first and foremost, maybe just have a conversation with them about some of the things you've personally experienced, factual inaccuracies, biases, etc. And maybe that's just a short conversation you have with them. Maybe you have a full-blown online or in-class discussion about what they think about generative AI. And instead of you telling them that the tool is inaccurate, they're telling each other. And then maybe you take it a step further if you feel comfortable again, and talk about the implications of generative AI on your specific discipline. So Jadrian, you teach economics, you can start thinking about how we can start thinking about generative AI and job automation and job creation, right? Or Chelsea, you probably are going to be teaching future writers. How can we use GPT as an extension of ourselves as a way to actually progress us towards career goals instead of a replacement of ourselves? So just kind of start thinking about the way you can have honest, authentic discussions with your students. I personally would have appreciated that, I think, at some point in my course, if I were a student, for my instructor to say, why don't we just have a conversation about this as it relates to chemistry? I was a chemist. So that's the advice I put out there for instructors. And I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll right now, which is about AI curriculum. So for audience, this fall, do you plan on teaching your students about application of AI or Gen AI in your discipline? And then do you believe generative AI could have a positive effect on supporting student learning if used correctly? I'll also go to say here of your students who are not taught how to use generative AI and don't kind of take the steps to teach themselves. They're the ones who are going to get caught for plagiarism pretty quick. Or academic dishonesty. I don't even know if we call it plagiarism. I've just been kind of filing it under academic dishonesty. Okay. All right, I'll let a few more folks answer. Seems like a lot of folks are planning on about 42%. I'll go ahead and share the results here. Sorry if you're still answering. 42% of folks in attendance here plan on teaching their students about applications of Gen AI. Some folks undecided, some folks not teaching, but definitely would. All right, our last story that we'll talk about, and we're going to kind of have a hot topic to discuss here, is about Bill Gates was recently on a podcast, and he was talking about how AI is likely to kind of act as our favorite high school teacher, and was chatting about the potential impact of generative AI. And I'm going to pull up a quote. Very few students get feedback from software programs on an essay that this could be clearer, or you really skip this piece and the reasoning. I do think the AI will be a great high school teacher who really marks your essay and you go back and think, okay, I need to step it up here. He did stop short of saying AI could or should ever replace human teachers. Rather, chatbots could assist overworked teachers and help close the education gap for low-income students around the world, he said. So my first point of this is Bill Gates clearly has never heard of Packback Deep Dives. But second was, he speaks to this very, I think, kind of great point, which is AI could be used to, number one, close the gaps with our students who need the most help, but two, support overworked educators. So a misconception that I've been, aware of for quite some time, and sometimes comes up in conversations, especially in my role, is that when teachers use AI or technology to automate parts of their workflow, they're lazy. And I think that's such a sad misconception that exists. And it's unfair as a former educator who relied on technology to cap my hours per week under 70 hours a week, right? And quite frankly, as a teacher who wouldn't have been able to access probably about 25% of my students if I didn't have a website that I had built for them to access note material. So I'm going to just ask the panelists what they think about this, because the way that I see AI supporting educators is that it can actually, like I said, help bridge those close the gap between your highest performing and lowest performing students. But what if we can reframe the way we think about technology to actually just be an extension of the educator and bring the educator closer to the student? And that's kind of like, that's my driving factor. That's how we develop products at Packback. So Chelsea, I'll start with you. Kind of what's your take on that misconception that the use of AI is, let's say, lazy for teaching and not empowering?
Yeah, I think a lot of people assume that the teacher's main role is grading, and it's not. There's so much more that goes into it. And with this help, I don't have to spend so much time giving feedback, because I know that there are tools that will give feedback just as high quality as mine. And it gives me more time to work on class discussions, come up with more thoughtful questions for what we're talking about, to spend more time finding the right article to analyze with my students in class, or to have more open time during office hours for when students come to ask me questions, or even to take care of myself so that I am, the best that I can be the next morning in class, so that, I wasn't up all night grading. I got a restful night's sleep and I'm ready to tackle the day.
Absolutely. I've also never met a teacher who works a normal schedule and like under 4 hours a week. That's just like doesn't exist. Like I only know teachers who are using their own money to like give their students supplies and access to materials, or work overtime, or like go out of their way to support a student who needs it. Like I only know teachers to overextend themselves. And if you know a teacher who's not doing that, I would love to meet them. Until then, I haven't been proven wrong. So yeah, Jadrian, what's your hot take here?
Sure. So I think it's going to be very similar to Chelsea. So this is actually one where this is a very popular econ concept. So I used to teach a labor economics course, and I can even tell you that among, I will say, students who should know better, they don't always know. They come in with this idea of like that there's this. So what you actually describe as a substitution effect, the idea that this is going to substitute for a teacher, and now a teacher doesn't have to work as much. And so from an economic standpoint, we actually always talk about like that there's these two sides to how automation or robots or computers, how they impact our ability to do work. And so I think like it's popularly phrased as like the automation paradox is what it's called. I think popularly it's called that, not in economics. But it's exactly what you said. It's this idea that if we can automate certain parts of our task, it lowers the cost of what we're doing, and we can actually do more of those things. So if I don't have to provide individual feedback for each person, I can actually give that feedback kind of in groups. And then I can then spend and kind of shift my effort to meeting with students individually, having personal one-on-one office hours, and actually doing more sort of proactive stuff rather than reactive stuff. And so like I always think it's really interesting that some industries, it's really clear to see that, and in other ones it's not. And so like one of the most famous ones is like when the X-ray was created, and we have the ability to see inside of our bodies, and like that should be something that makes doctors less valuable, because like now we can actually do all the imaging and stuff. But instead it made it cheaper, and now we can do way more stuff, and doctors can be more effective. I think I saw like a really interesting sort of Gen AI stuff on, there's these plugins that'll listen to a doctor's conversation, and instead of a doctor having to type up their notes at the end, it just automatically does it for them. It doesn't mean that the doctor is going to like take more time off. It means the doctor can see more patients now. And so more people are getting help, rather than this idea that suddenly like we don't call doctors lazy, like they're getting help. So I'm really excited for it. Like I think it opens up the opportunity to have sort of more personal interactions between teachers and students. And I think, especially, I started teaching maybe 10 or 11 years ago. My classes don't get smaller. My classes get bigger. The demands on teachers gets larger. Like I feel like I get less time with my students than I used to. And so I'm really excited that this gives me the opportunity to actually start kind of going back to what I used to do, of meeting with students regularly, talking about their goals, trying to help them figure out what they want to do after graduation. I'm really excited about that part. because Gen AI has sort of helped reduce some of the other work I had to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I always used to say when like ChatGPT kind of first came out, and I think everyone was like a little bit, what is this going to mean for our team? And I would say, hey, listen, our engineering team, let's say they all start incorporating GPT into their code. We're not going to downsize the engineering team. We're going to ask the engineering team to do everything that's ever been on the wish list to make our tool the most cool, modifiable, personalized, because there's constant feedback we're getting from users about, it would be cool if you had this UX experience or this modification. And yeah, it would be cool, but those are all nice to haves. And we're a small tech company, and we can only prioritize need to haves, right? So I think that's where the mindset needs to shift. There we go. And then similarly, the way that I think about specifically educators being able to use AI as superpowers is you have, let's say best case scenario, you have a class of 30, what a dream, right? And one student graduated from one of the best high schools, valedictorian. The other student graduated from one of the worst high schools in the country, valedictorian, but they're on two very different paths in the same course. And the reality is that student who doesn't have as strong of writing skills needs more support. You might not be able to provide it to them. So what if there's a tool that can help them with grammatical errors, overall flow, and then you could spend a little bit more time with them on content ideas, right? And as a way to help us get everybody up to kind of like the same, base, like let's just get everybody up to first base, right? And then decide how you're going to spend your time differentiating support for your students. So it very much excites me, especially as somebody who taught writing, who was not confident in their own writing, right? Like I would love to have AI support me there. Well, let's go ahead and transition to some just panelist questions. And if you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature there. You can just put in your questions. But I have a couple of questions prepared. So the first question I have is, what guidance have you received from your university or maybe department on how to execute your fall semester as it relates to generative AI or use of AI? And then how are you navigating that in your fall planning?
So my department has written us a policy to put in our syllabus, and they've encouraged us to have a conversation about ChatGPT or other AI tools. And that's pretty much it. We're all kind of in the same boat where this is very new and it's still growing. And I don't want to toot my own horn, but I'm probably the one that has the most experience with AI and using it with assignments. And it's still very minimal. And so we're all just kind of, building the plane as it's taken off.
We say that all the time at PackBack, building the plane as you fly it. Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? Like the reality is too, one of the best things you could do when you're figuring it out, go back to the quote, great teachers steal, is just like talk to other people in other departments at other institutions in other disciplines. Maybe you're talking to a K-12 teacher, even though you teach higher ed, and just gather ideas, because this isn't a time for us to like gatekeep thought leadership. It's a time for us to be really vocal with what we're doing, especially when we find something successful. Adrian, how about you?
So things are definitely, I see things in my email. I would say the problem is it's that summertime. Those emails are coming in over the summer and I'm not ready to actually look at those yet. So I know that our Center for Teaching and Learning is doing webinars about how to adjust your assignments to kind of avoid the pitfalls of GPT. I've seen things come in where it's I would say similar, where have the conversation. It's important to talk about it. Don't just hide it. Official policies, no, not yet. Right? We haven't gotten an email from the provost that says this is the policy, but I think different places on campus are starting to say, whether that's academic integrity or Center for Teaching and Learning, are starting to say like, here's guidance and here's some things you can do. But it's really on the faculty to be proactive about it. And I think my guess is that's going to be true for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd agree. And I think if you do have autonomy, it does give you agency to learn more about the tool and decide how you want to go about it, and decide, where you are on the spectrum. Is it, I'm going to have a dialogue with my students about it, but ultimately avoid bringing it into my classroom or encouraging use of it. Are you maybe going to allow it, but not encourage it? Are you going to straight up encourage it? Are you going to require it? So I think while you have a little bit of autonomy now, I'd lean into it and take advantage of it, because we might not have it. Who knows? And, you know, in 10 years, it might be everybody's forced to be using generative AI for everything, which.
Kelsey,
That's like,
may I ask a couple questions here?
yeah, of course.
So has the notion of academic freedom come up in this in this context relative to generative AI or chat GPT? For either of you?
It has not come up at my university, but I have friends and colleagues at other places who have started to broach that subject, where they are at universities that have taken a very hard stance on not using it at all. And they have broached that sort of academic freedom argument of like, we should be allowed to use it if we're using it for constructive purposes. So it has definitely not happened directly to me, but I've heard of it yet. I've heard of it happening at other places.
Kelsey, anything from you?
Yeah, my university, or at least my department, is very open to experimenting with how we teach and what we teach. So I am very fortunate to work at a place that encourages academic freedom, and I haven't come across anything, at least from the higher ups, that are saying, no, you can't do this. It's very open and free there, and I'm very appreciative of that.
So the next question is on articulation agreements from 2-year to 4-year in transfer. Is there an opportunity to think about wording in those articulation agreements that can begin to address, let's say a community college is unaware and moves to a university. I don't see that as problematic personally, as one who has adopted generative AI and then moves to a university and something that's different. Is there any role for this discussion in terms of articulation agreements? And if so, how? And if not, why not?
That sounds way above my pay grade, and I had never considered it. But you know, so as in my role as director, I approve transfer credits. So I'll say at a very low level, I approve transfer credits that come in from different universities, community colleges, and it is not something I was prepared to do professionally before I took this job, of just getting to see syllabus or syllabi from all these other universities of how everyone else is teaching what I view as, I think I've said it a couple times, a very basic principles of economics course, it's just a course in economics. I hadn't thought about how one school or one department's view on AI would even impact like my belief in if it's worth transferring that credit because they're super pro AI versus being at a place that maybe isn't. But I think that is something that I guess I should start thinking about going forward.
I'm just thinking about those students, especially those who may come from different types of institutions. There's a lot of discussions in the chat relative to a focus around low income, first generation community college students transferring, and in terms of their ability to adapt in moving into the larger institutions or 4-year institutions. I just put it on the radar. I'm not expecting any kind of answer at this point, but my space is practices and policies in trying to make sure that we keep the lanes open for all students. So thank you.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I can't speak to policy, but for students that have learning disabilities or are English language learners, ChatGPT can be very useful. If a student has ADHD with executive function disorder, they can go to Claude or ChatGPT and say, this is my assignment, it's due in 3 weeks, what do I do? And it will come up with a daily schedule of tasks to complete for that student. Or if I have a student that has or is still learning English, they can take my writing assignment and plug it into ChatGPT and say, can you translate this into Vietnamese for me? And it will do that. It can even translate and then adapt the reading comprehension level. So it's, can you explain this to me in Mandarin like I'm in middle school? And it will take what I've written in English at a college level and adapt it into Mandarin, and then bring it down a comprehension level so that it is more accessible to them. I know that if I were given an assignment and said, write a research paper, and I didn't know how to start it, I wouldn't start it. And so ChatGPT does open the door for those students that don't know how to approach these things. And so I'm really excited because I'm teaching a stretch course, which is typically taken by students with learning disabilities and English language learners, and using ChatGPT can help them get up to where they can be.
Just one more thought, and I just saw it in the chat there. Prior to coming to the League for Innovation, I served as a trustee for the Higher Learning Commission on Accreditation. And the level of engagement of accreditation as part of this conversation, I think will really be helpful in terms of what institutions do, and the whole notion of courses and credits, how they're accepted and how they appear on a student's record. We may not be thinking about it at this particular point, but based upon whatever these practice or policies that are being developed, they have to be sanctioned by someone so that the National Student Clearinghouse and others who are receiving this information and transferring it on, there's no question to employers or others about it. And my last statement is, I would argue that businesses, workforce, employers will be adapting and adopting faster the usage for applications in their environments than education, and will probably be more receptive than we think they would be, and can help drive this conversation. That's all I have, Kelsey.
I love that. Thank you so much. And we got an amazing question in the chat just right now. That's a perfect segue, which is what we're reading and listening to. So there are so many resources out there on how to become more digitally literate, especially as it comes to generative AI. So a daily, it's a little bit like 200, 300 level, but it's a really great daily newsletter that is where I got a lot of these news stories from. Wharton School just actually released this Practical AI for Instructors and Students Part 1. This is, I believe it's Ethan Malik and his wife, I think, doing this together, but it's a great YouTube video and it should teach you about generative AI, links to ChatGPT. And then Jadrian recommended these two resources, One Useful Thing. I think this is a newsletter, correct, by Ethan Malik. Awesome. And then also a paper on implementation strategies in classrooms. So these are really great resources. And like I said, this deck will be sent to you, all of these links directly after this session, or maybe like within 2 days. But these are all great places to get started. I also believe there are some pretty good like Coursera courses that are probably pretty inexpensive on how do you actually interact with GPT effectively. And then of course, I have to plug my own website here, but if you go to packback.co/webinars, we've done a lot of early introduction conversations about generative AI, but we specifically had a workshop for educators called How to Create a ChatGPT Proof Assignment, where we actually teach you how to prompt ChatGPT for educational support. So that's a really great place to start. So we'll go ahead and end this session with just a final reflection. And if you are curious about Packback, or if you have questions, you can email curious@packback.co. But just a final reflection from our panelists. So I'm just gonna have everyone leave with a final reflection, note, word of advice, whatever you want your last words to be in this recorded webinar. So I'll start with, I'm gonna go for Jadrian, Chelsea, and Rufus, because that is the order in which I see their faces. So Jadrian, I'm gonna put you on the spot first.
I was hoping I could go last. So my final thoughts would actually, I think, would be to lean into it. So I've been watching the chat like off on the side, and I think this has been repeated over and over. So maybe I'll echo the chat. It's not going anywhere. It's not disappearing. So right, like hiding behind your computer and not touching it and trying to ignore it. It is going to be a regular part of our lives, whether we like it or not. And so I think it's important for us to actually try to figure out how to use it and to be proactive in figuring out whether that's emails, changing our writing assignments, rewriting questions, coming up with new questions, new prompts. Like I think it is a great tool to help us do our jobs better. And I think it's really important for us to actually just figure out how we can do that.
Along the same sentiment, I think that we should fully lean into this and help students use it instead of rely on it. And one of my colleagues said that we can use ChatGPT essays as the standard and encourage students to steer away from that formulaic writing. And she said, it was a great line, "I hope writing gets weird," and that people can experiment with their writing more. And I'm really excited to see if my students' writing gets weird.
I love that. I've been talking about spicy writing lately. I'm like, I want my writing to be spicy. I need it to have flavor. All right, Rufus, final words to send us off.
Well, I remain very optimistic, and this conversation began with faculty in the classroom and is spreading throughout the institution. And based upon what I've seen in the chat as well, it needs to be part of every conversation at every level of the organization, so that everyone becomes more comfortable and understands the direction the organization will be taking. I would hate that individuals and or students, faculty, staff, or whomever would be penalized for their use. So clarity would be extremely helpful, and anything that can be shared by those who are on the panel, those who are in the audience, would be helpful for us to understand your application and help us to keep this conversation moving. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you for joining this conversation and being a part of the conversation. As we log off, there will be a little survey that's sent to you. I think it's just via Zoom. We would appreciate it if you could fill that out. It's really helpful for us to kind of come up with content moving forward, get feedback, and then also just get a capture of sentiment of educators, faculty, administrators out there. But thanks so much to the panelists. Thank you, Rufus. Really appreciate you. And we'll see y'all in a month. Bye, everyone.